The Cat and the Mouse in Partnership. A cat had made acquaintance with a mouse, and had spoken so much of the great love and friendship she felt for her, that at last the mouse consented to live in the same house with her, and go shares in the housekeeping. "But we must provide for the winter, or else we shall suffer hunger," said the cat. "You, little mouse, cannot venture everywhere in case you at last run into a trap." This good counsel was followed, and a little pot of fat was bought, but they did not know where to put it. At length, after long consultation, the cat said, "I know of no place where it could be better put but the church. No one will trouble to take it away from there. We will hide it in a corner, and we won't touch it until we are in want." So the little pot was placed in safety, but it was not long before the cat had a great longing for it, and said to the mouse, "I wanted to tell you, little mouse, that my cousin has a little son, white with brown spots, and she wants me to be godmother to it. Let me go out today, and do you take care of the house alone." "Yes, go certainly," replied the mouse, "and when you eat anything good, think of me. I should very much like a drop of the red christening wine." But it was all untrue. The cat had no cousin, and had not been asked to be godmother. She went straight to the church, slunk to the pot of fat, began to lick it, and licked the top off. Then she took a walk on the roofs of the town, looked at the view, stretched herself out in the sun, and licked her lips whenever she thought of the little pot of fat. As soon as it was evening, she went home again. "Ah, here you are again," said the mouse. "You must certainly have had an enjoyable day." "It went off very well," answered the cat. "What was the child's name?" asked the mouse. "Top off," said the cat dryly. "Top off," echoed the mouse. "It is indeed a wonderful and curious name. Is it in your family?" "What is there odd about it?" said the cat. "It is not worse than bread thief, as your godchild is called." Not long after this, another great longing came over the cat. She said to the mouse, "You must again be kind enough to look after the house alone, for I have been asked a second time to stand godmother, and this child has a white ring around its neck. I cannot refuse." The kind mouse agreed, but the cat slunk under the town wall to the church, and ate up half of the pot of fat. "Nothing tastes better," said she, "than what one eats by oneself," and she was very much pleased with her day's work. When she came home, the mouse asked, "What was the child called?" "Half Gone," answered the cat. "Half Gone? What a name! I have never heard it in my life. I don't believe it's in the calendar." Soon the cat's mouth began to water once more after her licking business. "All good things in threes," she said to the mouse. "I have again to stand godmother. This child is quite black, and has very white paws, but not a single white hair on its body. This only happens once in 2 years. So will you let me go out?" "Top off, half gone," repeated the mouse. "They are such curious names. They make me very thoughtful." "Oh, you sit at home in your dark gray coat and your long tail," said the cat, "and you get fanciful. That comes of not going out in the day." The mouse had a long, good cleaning out while the cat was gone, and made the house tidy. But the greedy cat ate the fat every bit up. "When it's all gone, one can be at rest," she said to herself, and at night she came home sleek and satisfied. The mouse asked at once after the third child's name. "It won't please you any better," said the cat. "He was called Clean Gone." "Clean Gone," repeated the mouse. "I do not believe that name has been printed any more than the others. Clean gone? What can it mean?" She shook her head, curled herself up, and went to sleep. From this time on, no one asked the cat to stand godmother, but when the winter came and there was nothing to be got outside, the mouse remembered their provision and said, "Come, cat, we will go to our pot of fat, which we have stored away. It will taste very good." "Yes, indeed," answered the cat. "It will taste as good to you as if you stretched your thin tongue out the window." They started off, but when they reached it, they found the pot in its place, but quite empty. "Ah," said the mouse, "now I know what has happened. It has all come out. You are a true friend to me. You have eaten it all when you stood godmother. First the top off, then half of it gone. Then, clean gone was already on the poor mouse's tongue, and scarcely it was out that the cat made a spring at her, seized and swallowed her. You see, that is the way of the world." The 6 Swans. A king was once hunting in a great wood, and he hunted the game so eagerly that none of his courtiers could follow him. When evening came on, he stood still and looked round him, and he saw that he had quite lost himself. He sought a way out, but he could find none. Then he saw an old woman with a shaking head coming towards him, but she was a witch. "Good woman," he said to her, "can you not show me the way out of the wood?" "Oh, certainly, Sir King," she replied. "I can quite well do that, but on one condition, which if you do not fulfill you will never get out of the wood, and will die of hunger." "What is the condition?" asked the king. "I have a daughter," said the old woman, "who is so beautiful that she has not her equal in the world, and is well fitted to be your wife. If you will make her your lady queen, I will show you the way out of the wood." The king, in anguish of mind, consented. The old woman led him to her house, where her daughter was sitting by the fire. She received the king as if she were expecting him, and he saw that she was certainly very beautiful, but she did not please him, and he could not look at her without a secret feeling of horror. As soon as he had lifted the maiden onto his horse, the old woman showed him the way, and the king reached his palace, where the wedding was celebrated. The king had already been married once, and had by his first wife 7 children, 6 boys and 1 girl, whom he loved more than anything in the world. And now, because he was afraid that their stepmother might not treat them well, and might do them harm, he put them in a lonely castle that stood in the middle of the wood. It lay so hidden, and the way it was so hard to find, that he himself could not have found it out, had not a wise woman given him a reel of thread which possessed a marvelous property. When he threw it before him, it unwound itself and showed him the way. But the king went so often to his dear children that the queen was offended at his absence. She grew curious, and wanted to know what he had to do quite alone in the wood. She gave his servants a great deal of money, and they betrayed the secret to her, and also told her of the reel, which alone could point out the way. She had no rest now till she had found out where the king guarded the reel, and then she made some little white shirts, and she had learnt from her witch mother, sewed an enchantment in each of them. And when the king had ridden off, she took the little shirts and went into the wood, and the reel showed her the way. The children, who saw someone coming in the distance, thought it was their dear father coming to them, and sprang to meet him very joyfully. Then she threw over each a little shirt, which when it had touched their bodies, changed them into swans, and they flew away over the forest. The queen went home quite satisfied, and thought she had got rid of her stepchildren, but the girl had not run to meet her father with her brothers, and she knew nothing of her. The next day, when the king came to visit his children, he found no one but the girl. "Where are your brothers?" asked the king. "Alas, dear father," she answered, "they have gone away and left me all alone." And she told him that, looking out of her little window, she had seen her brothers flying over the wood in the shape of swans, and she showed him the feathers which they had let fall in the yard, and which she had collected. The king mourned, but he did not think that the queen had done the wicked deed, and as he was afraid the maiden would also be taken from him, he wanted to take her with him. But she was afraid of the stepmother, and begged the king to let her stay just one more night in the castle in the wood. The poor maiden thought, "My home is no longer here. I will go and seek my brothers." And when night came, she fled away into the forest. She ran all through the night and the next day, till she could go no further for weariness. Then she saw a little hut, went in, and found a room with 6 little beds. She was afraid to lie down on one, so she crept under one of them, lay on the floor, and was going to spend the night there. But when the sun had set, she heard a noise, and she saw 6 swans flying in at the window. They stood on the floor and blew at one another, and blew all their feathers off, and their swan-like skin came off like a shirt. Then the maiden recognized her brothers, and overjoyed she crept out from under the bed. Her brothers were not less delighted than she to see their little sister again, but their joy did not last long. "You cannot stay here," they said to her. "This is a den of robbers. If they were to come here and find you, they would kill you." "Could you not protect me?" asked the little sister. "No," they answered, "for we can only lay aside our swan skins for a quarter of an hour every evening. For this time we regain our human forms, but then we are changed into swans again." Then the little sister cried and said, "Can you not be freed?" "Oh no," they said, "the conditions are too hard. You must not speak or laugh for 6 years, and must make in that time 6 shirts for us out of star flowers. If a single word comes out of your mouth, all your labor is in vain." And when the brothers had said this, the quarter of an hour came to an end, and they flew away out of the window as swans. But the maiden had determined to free her brothers, even if it should cost her life. She left the hut, went into the forest, climbed a tree, and spent the night there. The next morning she went out, collected star flowers, and began to sew. She could speak to no one, and she had no wish to laugh, so she sat there, looking only at her work. When she had lived there some time, it happened that the king of the country was hunting in the forest, and his hunters came to the tree on which the maiden sat. They called to her and said, "Who are you?" But she gave no answer. "Come down to us," they said. "We will do you no harm." But she shook her head silently. As they pressed her further with questions, she threw them the golden chain from her neck, but they did not leave off, and she threw them her girdle, and when this was no use, her garters, and then her dress. The huntsman would not leave her alone, but climbed the tree, lifted the maiden down, and led her to the king. The king asked, "Who are you? What are you doing up that tree?" But she answered nothing. He asked her in all the languages he knew, but she remained as dumb as a fish. Because she was so beautiful, however, the king's heart was touched, and he was seized with a great love for her. He wrapped her up in his cloak, placed her before him on his horse, and brought her to his castle. There he had her dressed in rich clothes, and her beauty shone out as bright as day, but not a word could be drawn from her. He set her at table by his side, and her modest ways and behavior pleased him so much that he said, "I will marry this maiden and none other in the world." And after some days he married her. But the king had a wicked mother who was displeased with the marriage, and had said wicked things of the young queen. "Who knows who this girl is?" she said. "She cannot speak, and is not worthy of a king." After a year, when the queen had her first child, the old mother took it away from her. Then she went to the king and said the queen had killed it. The king would not believe it, and would not allow any harm to be done to her, but she sat quietly sewing at the shirts and troubling herself about nothing. The next time when she had a child, the wicked mother did the same thing, but the king could not make up his mind to believe her. He said, "She is too sweet and good to do such a thing as that. If she were not dumb and could defend herself, her innocence would be proved." But when the third child was taken away, and the queen was once again accused, and could not utter a word in her own defense, the king was obliged to give her over to the law, which decreed that she must be burnt to death. When the day came on which the sentence was to be executed, It was the last day of the 6 years in which she must not speak or laugh, and now she had freed her dear brothers from the power of enchantment. The 6 shirts were done. There was only the left sleeve wanting to the last. When she was led to the stake, she laid the shirts out on her arm, and as she stood on the pile and the fire was about to be lighted, she looked around her and saw 6 swans flying through the air. Then she knew that her release was at hand, and her heart danced for joy. The swans fluttered around her, and hovered low so that she could throw the shirts over them. When they had touched them, the swan skins fell off, and her brothers stood before her living, well and beautiful. Only the youngest had a swan's wing instead of his left arm. They embraced and kissed each other, and the queen went to the king, who was standing by in great astonishment, and began to speak to him, saying, "Dearest husband, now I can speak and tell you openly that I am innocent and have been falsely accused." She told him of the old woman's deceit, and how she had taken the 3 children away and hidden them. Then they were fetched, to the great joy of the king, and the wicked mother came to no good end. But the king and the queen with their 6 brothers lived many years in happiness and peace. The Dragon of the North. Very long ago, as old people have told me, there lived a terrible monster who came out of the north and laid waste whole tracts of country, devouring both men and beasts. And this monster was so destructive that it was feared that unless help came, no living creature would be left on the face of the earth. It had a body like an ox, and legs like a frog, 2 short forelegs, and 2 long ones behind. And besides that, it had a tail like a serpent, 10 fathoms in length. And when it moved, it jumped like a frog, and with every spring it covered half a mile of ground. Fortunately, its habit was to remain for several years in the same place, and not to move on till the whole neighborhood was eaten up. Nothing could hunt it, because its whole body was covered with scales, which were harder than stone or metal, and its 2 great eyes shone by night, and even by day like the brightest lamps. And anyone who had ill luck to look it into the eyes became as if it were bewitched, and was obliged to rush of his own accord into the monster's jaws. In this way the dragon was able to feed upon both men and beasts without the least trouble to itself, as it needed not to move from the spot where it was lying. All the neighboring kings had offered rich rewards to anyone who should be able to destroy the monster, either by force or enchantment, and many had tried their luck, but all had miserably failed. Once a great forest in which the dragon lay had been set on fire. The forest was burnt down, but the fire did not do the monster the least harm. However, there was a tradition amongst the wise men of the country that the dragon might be overcome by one who possessed King Solomon's signet ring, upon which a secret writing was engraved. This inscription would enable anyone who was wise enough to interpret it to find out how the dragon could be destroyed. Only no one knew where the ring was hidden, nor was there any sorcerer or learned man to be found who would be able to explain the inscription. At last a young man, with a good heart and plenty of courage, set out to search for the ring. He took his way towards the sun rising, because he knew that all the wisdom of old time comes from the east. After some years, he met with a famous Eastern magician, and asked for his advice in the matter. The magician answered, "Mortal men have but little wisdom, and can give you no help, but the birds of air would be better guides to you if you could learn their language. I can help you understand it if you stay with me for a few days." The youth thankfully accepted the magician's offer and said, "I cannot now offer you any reward for your kindness, but should my undertaking succeed, your trouble shall be richly repaid." Then the magician brewed a powerful potion out of 9 sorts of herbs which he had gathered himself, all alone by moonlight, and gave the youth 9 spoonfuls of it daily for 3 days, which made him able to understand the language of birds. At parting, the magician said to him, "If you ever find Solomon's ring and get possession of it, then come back to me, that I may explain the inscription on the ring to you, for there is no one else in the world who can do this." From that time the youth never felt lonely as he walked along. He always had company, because he understood the language of the birds. And in this way he learned many things, which mere human knowledge could have never taught him. But time went on, and he heard nothing about the ring. It happened one evening, when he was hot and tired with walking, and had sat down under a tree in a forest to eat his supper, that he saw 2 gaily plumaged birds that were strange to him, sitting at the top of the tree talking to one another about him. The first bird said, "I know that wandering fool under the tree there, who has come so far without finding what he seeks. He is trying to find King Solomon's lost ring." The other bird answered, "He will have to seek help from the witch maiden, who will doubtless be able to put him on the right track. If she had not got the ring herself, she knows well enough who has it." "But where to find the witch maiden?" said the first bird. "She has no settled dwelling, but is here today and gone tomorrow. He might as well try to catch the wind." The other replied, "I do not know certainly where she is at present, but in 3 nights from now she will come to the spring to wash her face, as she does every month when the moon is full, in order that she may never grow old nor wrinkled, but may always keep the bloom of youth." "Well," said the first bird, "the spring is not far from here. Shall we go and see how she does it?" "Willingly, if you like," said the other. The youth immediately resolved to follow the birds to the spring. Only 2 things made him uneasy. First, lest he might be asleep when the birds went, and secondly, lest he might lose sight of them, since he had not wings to carry him along so swiftly. He was too tired to keep awake all night, yet his anxiety prevented him from sleeping soundly. And when with the earliest dawn he looked up to the treetop, he was glad to see his feathered companions still asleep with their heads under their wings. He ate his breakfast and waited until the birds should start. But they did not leave the place all day. They hopped about from one tree to another, looking for food, all day long until the evening, when they went back to their old perch to sleep. The next day the same thing happened. But on the 3rd morning one bird said to the other, "Today we must go to the spring to see the witch maiden wash her face." They remained on the tree till noon. Then they flew away and went towards the south. The young man's heart beat with anxiety lest he should lose sight of his guides, but he managed to keep the birds in view until they again perched upon a tree. The young man ran after them until he was quite exhausted and out of breath, and after 3 short rests the birds at length reached a small open space in the forest, on the edge of which they placed themselves on the top of a high tree. When the youth had overtaken them, he saw that there was a clear spring in the middle of the space. He sat down at the foot of a tree, upon which the birds were perched, and listened attentively to what they were saying to each other. "The sun is not down yet," said the first bird. "We must wait a while till the moon rises and the maiden comes to the spring. Do you think she will see that young man sitting under the tree?" "Nothing is likely to escape her eyes, certainly not the young man," said the other bird. "Will the youth have the sense to not let himself be caught in her toils?" "We will wait," said the first bird, "and see how they get on together." The evening light had quite faded, and the full moon was already shining down upon the forest, when the young man heard a slight rustling sound. After a few moments there came out of the forest a maiden, gliding over the grass so lightly that her feet seemed to scarcely touch the ground, and stood beside the spring. The youth could not turn away his eyes from the maiden, for he had never in his life seen a woman so beautiful. Without seeming to notice anything, she went to the spring, looked up to the full moon, and then knelt down and bathed her face 9 times, looked up to the moon again, and walked 9 times around the well. As she walked, she said this: "Full-faced moon with light unshaded, let my beauty never be faded. Never let my cheek grow pale. While the moon is waning nightly, may the maiden bloom more brightly. May her freshness never fail." Then she dried her face with her long hair, and was about to go away, when her eyes suddenly fell upon the spot where the young man was sitting, and she turned towards the tree. The youth rose and stood waiting. Then the maiden said, "You ought to have a heavy punishment because you have presumed to watch my secret doings in the moonlight. But I will forgive you this time, because you are a stranger and knew no better. But you must tell me truly who you are, and how you came to this place, where no mortal has ever set foot before." The youth answered humbly, "Forgive me, beautiful maiden, if I have unintentionally offended you. I chanced to come here after long wandering, and found a good place to sleep under this tree. At your coming I did not know what to do, but stayed where I was, because I thought my silent watching could not offend you." The maiden answered kindly, "Come and spend this night with us. You will sleep better on a pillow than on damp moss." The youth hesitated for a little, but presently he heard the birds saying from the top of the tree, "Go where she calls you, but take care to give no blood, or you will sell your soul." So the youth went with her, and soon they reached a beautiful garden, where stood a splendid house, which glittered in the moonlight as if it was all built out of gold and silver. When the youth entered, he found many splendid chambers, each one finer than the last. Hundreds of tapers burnt upon golden candlesticks, and shed a light like the brightest day. At length they reached a chamber where a table was spread with the most costly dishes. At the table there were placed 2 chairs, one of silver, the other of gold. The maiden seated herself upon the golden chair, and offered the silver one to her companion. They were served by maidens dressed in white, whose feet made no sound as they moved about, and not a word was spoken during the meal. Afterwards, the youth and the witch maiden conversed pleasantly together, until a woman, dressed in red, came in to remind them that it was bedtime. The youth was now shown into another room, containing a silken bed with down cushions, where he slept delightfully. Yet he seemed to hear a voice near his bed which repeated to him, "Remember to give no blood." The next morning the maiden asked him whether he would not like to stay with her always in this beautiful place. As he did not answer immediately, she continued, "You see how I always remain young and beautiful, and I am under no one's orders. But I can do just what I like, so that I have never thought of marrying before. But from the moment I saw you, I took a fancy to you. So if you agree, we might be married and might live together like princes, because I have great riches." The youth could not but be tempted by the beautiful maiden's offer, but he remembered how the birds had called her the witch, and their warning always sounded in his ears. Therefore he answered cautiously, "Do not be angry, dear maiden, if I do not decide immediately on this important matter. Give me a few days to consider before we come to an understanding." "Why not?" answered the maiden. "Take some weeks to consider if you like, and take counsel with your own heart." And to make the time pass pleasantly, she took the youth over every part of her beautiful dwelling, and showed him all her splendid treasures. But these treasures were all produced by enchantment, for the maiden could not make anything she wished appear by the help of King Solomon's ring. Only none of these things remained fixed. They passed away like the wind without leaving a trace behind. But the youth did not know this. He thought they were all real. One day the maiden took him into a secret chamber, where a little gold box was standing on a silver table. Pointing to the box, she said, "Here is my greatest treasure. Those like it is not to be found in the whole world. It is a precious gold ring. When you marry me, I will give you this ring as a marriage gift, and it will make you the happiest of mortal men. But in order that our love story may last forever, you must give me for the ring 3 drops of blood from the little finger of your left hand." When the youth heard these words, a cold shudder ran over him, for he remembered that his soul was at stake. He was cunning enough, however, to conceal his feelings and to make no direct answer, but he only asked the maiden, as if carelessly, what was remarkable about the ring. She answered, "No mortal is able to entirely understand the power of this ring, because no one thoroughly understands the secret signs engraved upon it. But even with my half knowledge, I can work great wonders. If I put the ring upon the little finger of my left hand, then I can fly like a bird through the air wherever I wish to go. If I put it on the 3rd finger of my left hand, I am invisible, and I can see everything that passes around me, though no one can see me. If I put the ring upon the middle finger of my left hand, then neither fire nor water nor any sharp weapon can hurt me. If I put it on the forefinger of my left hand, then I can, with its help, produce whatever I wish. I can, in a single moment, build houses or anything I desire. Finally, as long as I wear the ring on the thumb of my left hand, that hand is so strong that it can break down rocks and walls. Besides these, the ring has other secret signs which, as I said, no one can understand. No doubt it contains secrets of great importance. The ring formerly belonged to King Solomon, the wisest of kings, during whose reign the wisest men lived. But it is not known whether this ring was ever made by mortal hands. It is supposed that an angel gave it to the wise king. When the youth heard all this, he determined to try to get possession of the ring, though he did not quite believe in all of its wonderful gifts. He wished the maiden would let him have it in his hand, but he did not quite like to ask her to do so, and after a while she put it back into the box. A few days after they were again speaking of the magic ring, the youth said, "I do not think it is possible that the ring has all the power you say it has." Then the maiden opened the box and took out the ring, and it glittered as she held it like the clearest sunbeam. She put it on the middle finger of her left hand, and told the youth to take a knife and try as hard as he could to cut her with it, for he would not be able to hurt her. He was unwilling at first, but the maiden insisted. Then he tried, at first only in play, and then seriously, to strike her with the knife, but an invisible wall of iron seemed to be between them, and the maiden stood before him, laughing and unhurt. Then she put the ring on her 3rd finger, and in an instant she vanished from his eyes. Presently she was beside him again, laughing, and holding the ring between her fingers. "Do let me try," said the youth, "whether I can do these wonderful things." The maiden, suspecting no treachery, gave him the magic ring. The youth pretended to have forgotten what to do, and asked which finger to put the ring on so that no sharp weapon could hurt him. "Oh, the middle finger of your left hand," the maiden answered, laughing. She took the knife and tried to strike the youth, and even tried to cut himself with it, but found it impossible. Then he asked the maiden to show him how to split stones and rocks with the help of the ring. So she led him into a courtyard where stood a great boulder stone. "Now," she said, "put the ring upon the thumb of your left hand, and you will see how strong that hand has become." The youth did so, and found to his astonishment that with a single blow of his fist, the stone flew into 1,000 pieces. Then the youth bethought him that he who does not use his luck when he has it is a fool, and that this was his chance, which once lost might never return. So while they stood laughing at the shattered stone, he placed the ring, as if in play, upon the 3rd finger of his left hand. "Now," said the maiden, "you are invisible to me until you take the ring off again." But the youth had no mind to do that. On the contrary, he went further off, then put the ring on the little finger of his left hand, and soared into the air like a bird. When the maiden saw him flying away, she thought at first that he was still in play, and cried, "Come back, friend, for now you see I have told you the truth." But the young man never came back. Then the maiden saw she was deceived, and bitterly repented that she never trusted him with the ring. The young man never halted in his flight until he reached the dwelling of the wise magician who had taught him the speech of birds. The magician was delighted to find his search had been successful, and at once set to work to interrupt the secret signs engraved upon the ring, but it took him 7 weeks to make them out clearly. Then he gave the youth the following instructions how to overcome the Dragon of the North. You must have an iron horse cast, which must have little wheels under each foot. You must also be armed with a spear 2 fathoms long, which you will be able to wield by means of the magic ring upon your left thumb. The spear must be as thick in the middle as a large tree, and both its ends must be sharp. In the middle of the spear, you must have 2 strong chains 10 fathoms in length. As soon as the dragon has made himself fast to the spear, which you must thrust through its jaws, you must spring quickly from the iron horse and fasten the ends of the chains firmly to the ground with iron stakes, so that he cannot get away from them. After 2 or 3 days, the monster's strength will be so far exhausted that you will be able to come near him. Then you can put Solomon's ring upon your left thumb and give him the finishing stroke, but keep the ring on your 3rd finger until you can come close to him, so that the monster cannot see you, else he might strike you dead with his long tail. But when all is done, take care you do not lose the ring, and that no one takes it from you by cunning. The young man thanked the magician for his directions, and promised, should they succeed, to reward him. But the magician answered, I have profited so much by the wisdom of the ring has taught me that I desire no other reward. Then they parted, and the youth quickly flew home through the air. After remaining in his own home for some weeks, he heard people say that the terrible dragon of the north was not far off, and might shortly be expected in the country. The king announced publicly that he would give his daughter in marriage, as well as a large part of the kingdom, to whoever should free the country from the monster. The youth then went to the king and told him that he had good hopes of subduing the dragon, if the king would grant him all he desired for the purpose. The king willingly agreed. The iron horse, the great spear, and the chains were all prepared as the youth requested. When all was ready, it was found that the iron horse was so heavy that 100 men could not move it from its spot. So the youth found there was nothing for it but to move it with his own strength by the means of the magic ring. The dragon was now so near that in a couple of springs he would be over the frontier. The youth now began to consider how he should act, for if he had to push the iron horse from behind, he could not easily move forwards. The dragon had his monstrous jaws wide open, all ready for his expected prey. A few paces nearer, and the man and the horse would have been swallowed up by them. The youth trembled with horror, and the blood ran cold. Yet he did not lose his courage, but holding the great spear upright in his hand, he brought it down with all his might right through the monster's lower jaw. Then quick as lightning he sprang from his horse before the dragon had time to shut his mouth. A fearful clap like thunder, which could be heard for miles around, now warned him that the dragon's jaws had closed upon the spear. When the youth had turned around, he saw the point of the spear sticking high up above the dragon's upper jaw, and he knew that the other end must be fastened firmly to the ground. But the dragon had his teeth fixed in the iron horse, which was now useless. The youth now hastened to fasten down the chains to the ground by means of the enormous iron pegs which he had provided. The death struggle of the monster lasted 3 days and 3 nights. In his writhing, he beat his tail so violently against the ground that at 10 miles distance the earth trembled as if with an earthquake. When he at length lost power to move his tail, the youth, with the help of the ring, took up a stone, which 20 ordinary men could not have moved, and beat the dragon so hard about the head with it that very soon the monster lay lifeless before him. You can fancy how great was the rejoicing when the news was spread abroad that the terrible monster was dead. His conqueror was received into the city with as much pomp as if he had been the mightiest of kings. The old king did not need to urge his daughter to marry the slayer of the dragon. He found her already willing to bestow her hand upon his hero, who had all alone done what whole armies had tried in vain to do. In a few days, a magnificent wedding was celebrated, at which the rejoicing lasted for 4 whole weeks. For all the neighboring kings had met together to thank the man who had freed the world from their common enemy, but everyone forgot amid the general joy that they ought to have buried the dragon's monstrous body, for it began now to have such a bad smell that no one could live in the neighborhood, and before long the whole air was poisoned, and a pestilence broke out which destroyed many hundreds of people. In this distress, the king's son-in-law resolved to seek help once more from the Eastern magician, to whom he had once traveled through the air like a bird by the help of the ring. But there is a proverb which says that the ill-gotten gains never prosper, and the prince found that the stolen ring brought him ill luck after all. The witch maiden had never rested night nor day until she had found out where the ring was. As soon as she discovered by means of magical arts that the prince in the form of a bird was on his way to the Eastern magician, she changed herself into an eagle and watched in the air until the bird she was waiting for came into sight, for she knew him at once by the ring which was hung around his neck by a ribbon. Then the eagle pounced upon the bird, and the moment she seized him in her talons, she tore the ring from his neck before the man in bird shape had time to prevent her. Then the eagle flew down to the earth with the prey, and the two stood face to face once more in human form. "Now, villain, you are in my power," cried the witch maiden. "I favored you with my love, and you repaid me with treachery and theft. You stole my most precious jewel from me, and you expect to live happily as the king's son-in-law? Now the tables are turned. You are in my power, and I will be revenged on you for your crimes." Forgive me, cried the prince. "I know too well how deeply I have wronged you, and I most heartily do repent it." The maiden answered, "Your prayers and your repentance come too late, and if I were to spare you, anyone would think me a fool. You have doubtfully wronged me. First you scorned my love, then you stole my ring. Now you must bear the punishment." With these words she put on the ring upon her left thumb, lifted the young man with one hand, and walked away with him under her arm. This time she did not take him to a splendid palace, but to a deep cave in a rock, where there were chains hanging from the wall. The maiden now chained the young man's hands and feet so he could not escape. Then she said in an angry voice, "Here you shall remain chained up until you die. I will bring you every day enough food to prevent you dying of hunger, but you need never hope for freedom any more." With these words she left him. The old king and his daughter waited anxiously for many weeks for the prince's return, but no news of him arrived. The king's daughter often dreamed that her husband was going through some great suffering. She therefore begged her father to summon all the enchanters and magicians, that they might try to find out where the prince was and how he could be set free. But the magicians, with all their arts, could find out nothing, except that he was still living and undergoing great suffering, but none could tell where he was to be found. At last, a celebrated magician from Finland was brought before the king, who had found out that the king's son-in-law was imprisoned in the East, not by men, but by some powerful being. The king now sent messengers to the East to look for his son-in-law, where by good luck met with the old magician who interpreted the signs on King Solomon's ring, and thus was possessed of more wisdom than anyone else in the world. The magician soon found out what he wished to know, and pointed to the place where the prince was imprisoned, but said, "He is kept there by enchantment, and cannot be set free without my help. I will therefore go with you myself." So they all set out, guided by birds, and after some days came to the cave where the unfortunate prince had been chained up for nearly 7 years. He recognized the magician immediately, but the old man did not know him, how he had grown so thin. However, he undid the chains by the help of magic, and took care of the prince until he recovered and became strong enough to travel. When he reached home, he found that the old king had died that morning, so that now he was raised to the throne, and after his long suffering came prosperity, which lasted to the end of his life. But he never got back the magic ring, nor has it ever again been seen by mortal eyes. Now, if you had been the prince, would you rather have not stayed with the pretty witch maiden? Story of the Emperor's New Clothes. Many years ago, there lived an emperor who was so fond of new clothes that he spent all his money on them in order to be beautifully dressed. He did not care about his soldiers, he did not care about the theater. He only liked to go out walking to show off his new clothes. He had a coat for every hour of the day, and just as they say of a king, he is in the council chamber. They always said, "Here, the emperor is in the wardrobe." In the great city in which he lived, there was always something going on. Every day, many strangers came there. One day, 2 impostors arrived who gave themselves out as weavers and said that they knew how to manufacture the most beautiful cloth imaginable. Not only were the texture and pattern uncommonly beautiful, but the clothes, which were made of the stuff, possessed this wonderful property that they were invisible to anyone who was not fit for office or who was unpardonably stupid. Those must be splendid clothes, thought the emperor. If I had them on, I could find out which men in my kingdom are unfit for the offices they hold. I could distinguish the wise from the stupid. Yes, this cloth must be woven for me at once. And he gave both the impostors much money, so that they might begin their work. They placed 2 weaving looms and began to do as if they were working, but they had not the least thing on the looms. They also demanded the finest silk and best gold, which they put in their pockets, and now worked at the empty looms until late into the night. I should very much like to know how far they have got on with the cloth, thought the emperor. But he remembered when he thought about it that whoever was stupid or not fit for office would not be able to see it. Now he certainly believed that he had nothing to fear for himself, but if he wanted first to send somebody else in order to see how he stood with regard to his office. Everybody in the whole town knew what a wonderful power the cloth had, and they were all curious to see how bad or how stupid their neighbor was. I will send my old and honored minister to the weavers, thought the emperor. He can best judge what the cloth is like, for he has intellect, and no one understands his office better than he. Now the good old minister went to the hall where the 2 impostors sat working at the empty weaving looms. Dear me, thought the old minister, opening his eyes wide. I see nothing, but he did not say so. Both the impostors begged him to be kind as to step closer, and asked him if it were not a beautiful texture and lovely colors. They pointed to the empty loom, and the poor old minister went forward, rubbing his eyes, but he could see nothing, for there was nothing there. Dear, dear, thought he, how can I be so stupid? Have I ever thought that, and nobody must know it? Can I not be fit for my office? No, I must certainly not say that I cannot see the cloth. Have you nothing to say about it? Asked one of the men who was weaving. Oh, it is lovely, most lovely, answered the old minister, looking through his spectacles. What a texture! What colors! Yes, I will tell the emperor that it pleases me very much. Now we are delighted at that, said both the weavers, and thereupon they named the colors and explained the make of the texture. The old minister paid great attention, so that he could tell the same to the emperor when he came back to him, which he did. The impostors now wanted more money, more silk, and more gold to use in their weaving. They put it all in their own pockets, and there came no threads on the loom. But they went on as they had done before, working at the empty loom. The emperor soon sent another worthy statesman to see how the weaving was getting on, and whether the cloth would soon be finished. It was the same with him as the first one. He looked and looked, but because there was nothing on the empty loom, he could see nothing. "Is it not a beautiful piece of cloth?" asked the two impostors, as they pointed to and described the splendid material which was not there. "Stupid I am not," thought the man, "so it must be my good office for which I am not fitted. It is strange, certainly, but no one must be allowed to notice it." So he praised the cloth which he did not see, and expressed to them his delight at the beautiful colors and the splendid texture. "Yes, it is quite beautiful," he said to the emperor. Everybody in town was talking of the magnificent cloth. Now the emperor wanted to see it himself while it was still on the loom. With a great crowd of select followers, amongst whom were both the worthy statesmen who had already been there before, he went to his cunning impostors, who were now weaving with all their might, but without fiber or thread. "Is it not splendid?" said both the old statesmen who had already been there. "See, your majesty, what a texture, what colors!" And then they pointed to the empty loom, for they believed that the others could see the cloth quite well. "What?" thought the emperor. "I can see nothing. This is indeed horrible. Am I stupid? Am I not fit to be the emperor? That were the most dreadful thing that could ever happen to me. Oh, it is very beautiful," he said. "It has my gracious approval." And then he nodded pleasantly and examined the empty loom, for he could not say that he saw nothing. The whole court round him looked and saw no more than the others, but they said like the emperor, "Oh, it is beautiful," and they advised him to wear these new and magnificent clothes for the first time at the great procession which was soon to take place. "Splendid, lovely, most beautiful," went from mouth to mouth. Everyone seemed delighted over them, and the emperor gave to his impostors the title of the court weavers to the emperor. Throughout the whole of the night, before the morning on which the procession was to take place, the impostors were up and working by the light over 16 candles. The people could see that they were very busy making the emperor's new clothes ready. They pretended they were taking the cloth from the loom, cut with huge scissors in the air, sewed with needles without thread, and then at last said, "Now the clothes are finished." The emperor came himself with the most distinguished knights, and each impostor held his arm as if they were holding on to something and said, "See, here are the breeches, here is the coat, here is the cloak," and so on. Spun clothes are so comfortable that one would imagine one had nothing on at all. That is the beauty of it. "Yes," said all the knights, but they could see nothing, for there was nothing there. "Will it please your majesty, graciously take off your clothes," said the impostors, "and then we will put on the new clothes, here before the mirror." The emperor took off all his clothes, and the impostors placed themselves before him as if they were putting on each part of his new clothes which was ready, and the emperor turned himself and bit himself in front of the mirror. "How beautifully they fit, how well they sit," said everybody. "What material, what colors! It is a gorgeous suit." "They are waiting outside with canopy, which your majesty is wont to have borne over you in the procession," announced the master of the ceremonies. "Look, I am ready," said the emperor. "Doesn't it sit well?" And he turned himself again to the mirror to see if his finery was on all right. The chamberlains, who used to carry the train, and put their hands near the floor as if they were lifting up the train, and they did so as if they were holding something in the air. They would not have it noticed that they could see nothing. So the emperor went along in the procession under the splendid canopy, and all the people in the streets and at the windows said, "How matchless are the emperor's new clothes! That train fastened to his dress, how beautifully it hangs!" No one wished it to be noticed that he could see nothing, for then he would have been unfit for his office, or else very stupid. None of the emperor's clothes had met with such approval as these had. "But he has nothing on," said a little child at last. "Just listen to the innocent child," said the father, and each one whispered to his neighbor what the child had said. But he has nothing on, for the whole the people called out at last. This struck the emperor, for it seemed to him as if they were right. But he thought to himself, I must go on with the procession now. And the chamberlains walked along still more uprightly, holding the train which was not there at all. Thank you for listening to Story Escape. Today we were reading a book, The Yellow Fairy Book, by various authors. Thank you for listening, and if you have any bedtime stories or fairy tales, any stories like that you would like me to read, I would be happy to hear your suggestions. And thank you so much for your support.